ora e te iwi and welcome to this episode of Playmakers. Joining me today is Waka ama extraordinaire Tupuria King. Kia ora e hoa.
Kia ora. Pleasure to be
Thank
here.
you so much. Great. Thank you so much for joining us. Look, Waka ama is a sport that's not too familiar in the mainstream, I have found anyway. Give us a little brief background as to, Waka ama and what it involves and your involvement in the sport.
Yeah, so Waka ama is a water sport. And it's in a way it's quite a traditional form of canoeing because it obviously ties back to not just our Māori heritage but our Polynesia culture. So kind of along the lines of our ancient sailing canoes, waka have always been a part of our history. So waka ama is just a modern version of waka. We have a waka with what we call an ama, an outrigger, and now it's more of a racing sport rather than a navigational sport. I first started at a very young age and introduced to waka ama through my father, and it became a whānau affair for us, and it's been a part of my life all the way up until now. So.
Well, you say that very humbly. It's become hugely a racing event, with a lot of thanks to your whānau and its participation. I think I read somewhere that you guys were called the first family of waka ama because your whānau are so heavily involved and do really well at the sport. Talk to us about the competitions that you do compete in, both here and abroad.
Yeah, like I said, it's definitely a whānau affair, and it almost happened in a certain timeline. So my father was the first one to paddle out of all of us, and he first introduced it to my three sisters and I, and then later on my mother. And the first one out of all of us really were my two older sisters, who became national and world champions. And me and my twin sister, we were the younger ones, and we kind of, watched them achieve these great results. And we kind of came a little bit later after them, and kind of, I guess, became champions ourselves. My mother, on the other hand, was the last person out of us to begin waka ama, and within 2 short years, she was the world sprint champion. So, and she just blew us all out of the water. So at one point in time, all of us were quite competitive and competing at the Waka ama Nationals. And I remember the story about we owned this black waka, and basically at the Waka ama Nationals, it featured in lane one in almost every final, and so that's kind of, I think, was the first time where we started kind of being recognized as this, waka ama family, or champions of the water, because we were just, filling that lane one and winning lots of medals. So yeah, it's good to be a part of that.
I love that. I love that your mama started later and then blew everyone away. Go, mum.
Yep. Natural skill. And
what was it about paddling, that really attracted you? You did play other sports at school and things like that, but what was it that, you said to yourself, I'm going to go with paddling all the way?
I did play a lot of other sports too, and I think I was quite evenly interested in all of them. But waka ama was always a unique one for me. It was always there for one, but for us, coming from Kaitaia and an even more rural community of Broadwood in the far north of New Zealand, it was always an awesome opportunity for us to partake in competitions and train with teams and other individuals, and then go to the Waka ama Nationals, which was down in Hamilton. And to put it in perspective, I haven't missed the Waka ama Nationals since I was 7 years old. I'm 28 years old now, so I've been competing in that competition for 21 years. So it's always been a significant part of my life. It wasn't until I was kind of a teenager, though, or when I first left high school and went to university, I started developing my own passion for it and actually started to look abroad. And around that same time, around 18, 19, I was invited to go to Tahiti to compete over there, overseas. It really opened my eyes to the competition and the level and the opportunities outside of New Zealand. And that even strengthened my connection to Waka and just sent me down a whole nother path.
That sounds like such a special journey, like really out of the
Mm.
box compared to, we no disrespect to other athletes that come through, through their grades, from like use rugby, for example, starting from club, coming through age groups, rah, rah, rah. It's been more like like a taha wairua type connection
Mhm.
with your whānau in tow and everyone succeeding. Is waka kind of a way of life for you and your whānau?
Definitely, definitely. I think we always say, yeah, more than a sport, a lifestyle, because it is exactly that. It's a sport that not just caters to people of all ages, from mini midgets to, there's paddlers who are 80 to 90 years old still paddling. Not only does it cater to that that in a physical sense and provides physical well-being improvements, but it targets all areas of taha wairua, so your taha whānau, so your social aspect of well-being, your taha hinengaro, so it improves your mental state, taha wairua, so your hopes and aspirations for the future, setting goals, but they don't have to be high performance goals. They can just be really simple, get out on the weekend and paddle with your whānau goals, so in that sense, there's no real pressure on you to perform. Although there's that aspect, and you can get there too, but it's a all around. It's a sport, I believe, that caters, to so much more than just performance.
I really love that. And from little old Broadwood up in the far north in the middle of nowhere, that's absolutely, I mean, it takes your breath away. You probably wouldn't
Yeah.
understand it unless you were in that owl. But you mentioned the word pressure. And at the end of the day, Waka is a competitive sport where a lot of people compete. There are national titles, world champs titles on the line. So, with
Mhm.
your whānau fully involved and now your whānau name, Te Kingi, that name synonymous with wakaama, is there that pressure to perform and do well?
Definitely, I think because for me, how I spoke about going over to Tahiti, and just to give a bit of context, Tahiti is one of the highest ranked countries. They are the pinnacle of wakaama, or over there they call it va'a. It's their, rugby to New Zealand, va'a or paddling is to them. It's their national sport, and um, over there, you can really see the passion and the. Uh, to put it in perspective, they train like Olympians. Like they train harder than I've ever seen anyone train before. And I kind of took on that mentality because I was invited to paddle with the Tahitian team, and I kind of learned their technique and their training. I kind of used that and brought it back to New Zealand, and used it to for for my benefit initially, to race here in New Zealand and try and set a different level. For me, the pressure exists in trying to maintain a certain level, knowing that I have younger, passionate, determined Wakama paddlers, which I was in a similar position. They're coming up now, which is awesome to see too. I love it. So yeah, it's I love it. It's competitive, but yeah, it's Wakama.
It's wakaama. That's it, simply. Let's talk a little bit about your training. You went to University of Waikato, did a bit of study there, and have really progressed in your sport in many different ways, probably a lot differently to how others have approached the sport. So talk about your study and how it has helped you not only better perform, but understand the sport.
Yeah, so I went to the University of Waikato, and yeah, I've always been interested in sport from such a young age, but I developed a stronger passion for wakaama, around this period. And a lot of that came down to what I was learning at university in terms of training, physiology, how the body adapts to training, what methods are best. Because for a sport like wakaama, we have a lot of coaches, but we don't have a lot of expertise in that area, like compared to, you know, rugby strength and conditioning coaches, or even canoe sprint, or a lot of Olympic mainstream sports. They don't have that support. So for me, I was like soaking in this knowledge and applying it to myself. I was just kind of just being my own guinea pig in a way. And yeah, it almost went hand in hand with my performance at that time. I decided to do my master's degree research on wakaama. So look, I basically, in a really simple um, understanding, I basically looked at what physical characteristics determine performance over a 500-meter sprint, because that's our main event at our sprint nationals.
Where does all that go? You've got all this knowledge now. I mean, I know you're not only studying and getting all this information for yourself, to for you to get better. What's
Mhm.
the end goal here?
So I've probably in that phase now in terms of, over the last 2 years, I've been running a business, Train Like a King, offering everything from training programs, coaching, to all age groups. I've been working with the main organisation of New Zealand, Waka in New Zealand, to help develop their coaching framework. But the vision is ideally to have um, that high performance coaching kind of section, so that we can really look at preparing our teams on a sports science level for Wakaama Worlds, or more importantly now the Paralympics, because Wakaama is in the Paralympics.
You mentioned that you're 28 years old. The world is still very much your oyster. Have you thought about a transition to get ready for an Olympics yourself?
I have. So probably as soon as COVID came about, it really reduced my international travel, and that kind of gave me enough time to kind of explore other areas. And so, not quite a year ago, I transitioned to the kayak. I've always been interested in the kayak, and even when I was kind of at my peak level of performance with wakaama, hopefully I'm not past my peak, but I was contacted by some kayak coaches, sprint kayak, Olympic sprint kayak coaches, and if they asked me if I wanted to transition and give kayak a go. But I was so busy with all these amazing opportunities to travel to Tahiti and Hawaii and all that, I didn't have the time up until about a year ago. And that's when I told myself, I'm going to give this a go. And surprisingly, within 6 months, I was able to win the surf ski kayak national championships. So that's open ocean craft. Um, and I have been giving the Olympic sprint kayak a go too. It's a little bit more difficult because the craft is really slim and it's a lot more tippy. And to be successful in that sport, you have to be quite strong too. The question is for me, if I really, I'm 28, so I know there's successful Olympians at the age of 35. So I mean, there's time. What would require me is a really dead set focus, and yeah, it still could happen. Yeah, I want to keep the options open.
Good on you. Good on you. And that's the reality of, these unprecedented times. You have to, think of other ways to stay in competition. But the Olympics, many people call it the pinnacle of sport. You talk about transitioning into a kayak. Describe that transition, because although it's not just jumping from one little boat to another little boat, is it?
No, exactly. So I can clearly look back now and think about the first time that I hopped on a surf ski kayak. So the surf ski kayak is quite large in volume. So for a Olympic sprint kayaker, these are probably the most balanced thing you can sit on, and I remember hopping on one of these things and struggling to stay in it for, a minute before flipping out on a flat lake, let alone having to paddle it in the ocean and rough water. So that goes into perspective. I kind of started off on this, really stable surf ski. As I got better, I progressed to a leaner surf ski. Then I built up the courage to invest in a stable sprint kayak, which was, when I first tried that, it was really tippy. And then only just recently, I'm comfortable enough to be in more of a racing type K1. So it's taken a while for me to adapt to being able to read the water, I think, too, and especially in an open ocean setting, has really crossed over. But now it's all about refining those things, and really focusing in on which races I want to be successful in, I think.
You say you've never missed a Waka national meet. Could there perhaps be a chance that you might if you're pursuing this Olympic future?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. If I get to a level where I feel that Wakama Nationals may conflict with my preparation for an event that maybe qualifies for the Olympics, or even more relevant to me at the moment, qualifying for the World Surf Ski Championships. I might look to miss the Wakama Nationals, and I know it'll be tough because after never missing a Wakama Nationals, 12-time Wakama National Champ, talking about pressure, I almost feel like there's an obligation for me to compete. But yeah, who knows? I'm very open at this point in my paddling life. But something like kayak kind of creates excitement.
I do have one final question. It's a little bit of a selfish one because I'm actually quite terrified. I have a fear of the water. And
Mm-hmm.
when I see, what you and your whānau achieve in the water, it makes me think that you must have a huge respect for the water. Can you describe that kind of relationship that you would have?
Yeah, definitely. Like, being a paddler, you over the years and experience of being out in, especially in open ocean conditions, you do build a really strong connection with the water, but you also understand the I guess the danger that exists out there. Like, I've definitely been in a lot of situations, that were quite, I've been lucky enough to never need to be rescued or anything like that to that extent. But, you being in that community and knowing the things that can happen and that have happened to paddlers, like, you do realize that you have to exercise safety precautions. Paddling with life jackets and communication devices is key these days. But I think on more of a wider sense, the connection to the water, it's the place where I can go to kind of cater to everything. It's almost like a form of meditation for me. So, like, people always ask, like, oh, how can you spend so much time on the water? Or, like, you know, uh, or even if they see really rough and dangerous conditions, they're like, oh, how do you go out and paddle that? And it's like, this is what we do. Like, we enjoy being out there on the water. We enjoy downwind surfing and waves and things like that, because it's exciting, and like I said earlier, it fills all of our whare tapawha in terms of physical, mental, spiritual, and all of those aspects of our well-being. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with us today, Tupu, and we wish you all the very best for the future. Can't wait to see where this Olympic journey takes you, but you're also doing such amazing things on the Waka stage as well. Ngā mihi.
Ngā mihi nui, thank you for having me.